Welcome back to the podcast. Today we're joined by Patrick Schreiner. Patrick is a professor at Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. He's also an elder at Emmaus Church in Kansas City, and he's an author. He's written several books, one of them on the topic we'll be discussing today, the doctrine of the ascension. In the Apostles' Creed, we declare that Jesus died, he descended to the dead, he rose again on the third day, and he ascended into heaven, and he's seated at the right hand of the Father. That's the doctrine of the ascension, that he ascended into heaven, he's seated at the right hand of the Father. And so this is kind of, Patrick in his book, in the subtitle of his book, calls this a neglected doctrine. And so this may be a doctrine that you haven't thought very deeply about, and so we hope that this interview will help with that. We hope that you will gain knowledge and be encouraged even by this doctrine of the ascension of Christ. You can listen to this podcast on any of the podcast platforms that you choose. You can also watch it if you'd like to see video of it on our YouTube channel. You're listening to the Church Matters podcast and ministry of Redeemer Church.
Hey, welcome to Church Matters, a podcast designed to help the church understand and apply a biblical worldview to all of life. Today we're diving into a doctrine that most of us affirm, but rarely think about, the ascension of Jesus Christ. We celebrate his birth at Christmas, we celebrate his death on Good Friday, and his resurrection on Easter. But what about his ascension? When was the last time that you read a book about that or heard it taught to? For many of us, the ascension feels like the forgotten doctrine, almost like the epilogue to the story. But my guest today argues it's not an afterthought, it's central. And so joining me is Dr. Patrick Schreiner, Associate Professor of New Testament and Biblical Theology at Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, author of several books, including The Ascension of Christ, Recovering a Neglected Doctrine, published by Lexham Press. Patrick shows us how the ascension ties together the incarnation, the cross, the resurrection, and even the return of Christ, and how it changes the way that we worship, witness, and wait. So Patrick, welcome to Church Matters, man.
Good to be with you, Gabe.
Yeah, well, we are grateful to have you. And you spent some time in the Pacific Northwest, didn't you?
Yeah. From 2014 to 2020, I was in Portland, Oregon, teaching at Western Seminary.
Okay.
And so I made a few trips up there to your neck of the woods, up to Seattle, to do some classes and meet with some pastors. And the Pacific Northwest is much more beautiful than Missouri, where I'm living. So I miss the mountains. I don't miss the rain, but I miss the coast and the mountains and the streams. And so it's a beautiful area of the country y'all live in.
Yeah.
It's hard to get to, though.
It's true, man. We're tucked away back here.
You got to go way up there north. But as we were just talking about, my brother's still in the Seattle area, so we're still going to make some trips up there.
That's right. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate you doing this for us today. And Patrick actually goes back with Pastor Jared also, so spent some time at Southern Baptist Theological Seminary. That's where you guys know each other through that, right?
Yeah, we worked together ages ago, it feels like now. We worked together in the doctoral studies office, and so... Yeah, Jared and I go way back, and he did a sojourn out there, and then he came back, and then now he's back. He needed to be with all the hipsters and the people who love chacos and hiking.
That's how
and
we think of him, he's all skinny jeans and, cool beanies and that sort of thing.
Exactly. So. Well, I mean, I'm a little like that too. I miss my hipster people being in Missouri. We just, all we talk about are the Chiefs. And so, which is fun. They're just no good this year, 1-2. So
that's right.
We'll
we have a massive Chiefs fan on our director of student ministry is a massive Chiefs fan because he's from Kansas area. So he's our resident Chiefs fan. Always make sure that we know what
if there's a Chiefs fan, because they will talk about it. It's like CrossFit. You will know that they do CrossFit.
I think his son learned the chop. His son learned the chop before anything else, so he was catechized well.
Yeah, well, my kids have been indoctrinated, so it's hard for me not to cheer for the Chiefs, although I have the Minnesota Vikings as my original team. But my kids are all Chiefs fans, so I got roped into it too.
That's awesome, man. Well, we won't hold any of that against you. We know that you still have good stuff to teach us today. So, I just want to talk a little bit about the ascension. So I kind of in the setup said, this is a neglected doctrine. I assume that you agree with that. I know you kind of mentioned that in the book and some different articles that I've read that you've written. Why do you think that evangelicals tend to ignore this doctrine? Why does it tend to be a forgotten doctrine?
Yeah, there's various reasons, and I hope, I think I wrote this book in 2020, so there's been some time. I hope there's been some recovery, even just that you're talking to me about it, that we've shown the light a little bit more on the ascension, even at my church. We don't always follow the church calendar, but sometimes we'll do an Ascension Sunday. I think we kind of do every other year. We do kind of the key moments in Jesus's life in terms of the church calendar. And so I actually have been encouraged, just even the fruit of this book, is I've heard more churches are talking about the doctrine, doing sermons on it or doing lessons on it. So your question, though, is why has it been neglected? And I think there's probably various reasons why. Number one, there is a sense in which, there's only two small narratives about it. And so you think about Jesus's life, it spends most of the time on his ministry and his death. And then, a chapter or two on his resurrection. But there's only a few, like 3 to 6 verses, I think 4 in the book of Acts and 3 in the book of Luke, that speak of the narrative of the ascension. And, you think about Matthew doesn't have it, Mark doesn't have it, and John doesn't have it, at least in narrative form. So you have, when you think about just like the amount of space that's given to the narrative of the ascension, as good Bible readers, you might think, oh, well, it's not here a lot. And so maybe that's part of the reason. I'd say maybe another reason we could mention, is, from a materialist or naturalist, or if you don't believe in the supernatural, which Christians do, but even if you believe in the supernatural, that Jesus bodily rose from the grave, I think it strikes us as a strange event, even as Christians, that a middle-aged Jewish man, around 33 years old, floats up into the sky. The resurrection makes a lot of sense. Like, it's the defeat of death. That's a really good thing. We all believe, like, okay, Jesus came to defeat death. And that, I think theologically that makes sense to us in terms of like why Jesus came to conquer death. But to float up in the sky doesn't feel as like necessary, or what was he doing in that? So from a modern kind of viewpoint, I think maybe we might struggle with, why is this necessary? And so even I actually think you see a little hint of that when the disciples come to Jesus in Acts chapter 1 and they say, is now the time that you're going to restore the kingdom to Israel? Acts 1:6 is the verse. And I think they're assuming you rose from the dead, you conquered on the cross. We're getting kind of the picture of who you are. Are you going to establish the kingdom now? Is it time to really, it's kind of the let's go do this thing, right? We've watched you go through your ministry. And Jesus says, no, there's going to be a mission in the meantime. You're going to go into all nations proclaiming the message of what I've done. And I think the implication is after that, he's like, and I need to ascend before the Father, and then I will return. And even though we have some like echoes and predictions of it in the Old Testament, I don't think they were very clear that that was going to happen. And even the angels, in Acts chapter 1, as Jesus is ascending into heaven, the angels say, hey, why are you staring up into heaven? It's time to go on, get on with your mission. So again, the disciples are a little confused. And so maybe that confusion carries over even to us a little bit, just in terms of what was the purpose of this? Why didn't Jesus stay? I always say, like, for evangelism, it would have been much easier for me to be like, hey, let me introduce you to this guy, Jesus. He's like 2,000 years old.
Hey, show him the nail scars.
Show me your scars. Talk about the first century. All about it. Evangelism would be much easier, it seems like, if he was here, and I could actually introduce him to the physical, bodily Jesus. But he's gone now, and he says this is a better plan. But I think sometimes we wonder, is it a better plan? Wouldn't it have been better if you stayed? But he left, and so for all those reasons, maybe some confusion around the ascension in terms of the implications of it, the lack of narrative witness to it, that we might, we just might not think about it a lot. Can I say one other thing?
Yeah, please.
You're talking about the ascension. I could go on for hours. Great, so man. Here we go. The other thing I'd say is that typically, and you kind of mentioned this in your intro, but when we tell the gospel story, because of the unclear implications of the ascension, we often don't speak at all about the ascension. So when we talk about the gospel story, it's like, okay, we're sinners. Christ died for us. He rose again. Hopefully we get to he rose again so we might have new life with him. And we kind of think the story ends there. Often, even in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul, when he's summarizing the gospel, he'll talk about the cross and the resurrection, but he doesn't mention the ascension. And so is it central to the good news, or is it something else? And so for all those reasons, we might just not think about it a lot.
Yeah, that's really good. I do think when we kind of have our basic gospel formulations, that sometimes the way that we think about it is, what is the bare minimum that a person needs to believe in order to be saved?
Sure.
And so we know we have to hit cross, we know we have to hit resurrection, but we don't always then, we might kind of give a little bit of lip service every now and then to, and he'll return again, but we don't necessarily talk much about the ascension. So what do you think we lose if we really only talk about cross, resurrection, and leave out the ascension? What are we missing or losing?
Yeah, and I want to be clear, I'm not trying to add, everyone can add their little thing to, this is what needs to be in the gospel. And then suddenly, like, everyday church members and Christians are feeling like, okay, what are the 15 points of doctrine that I need to remember to share the gospel? My point is not to, like, add one more thing to your list. It is, though, to try to help you see, like, the full story of what Christ has done. And
well, maybe related to that, though, would just be, I think that people don't even always think of the ascension as part of the good news. So even if you just, like, draw out the gospel to be, what's the whole good news of what Jesus has done and accomplished, and then you can get really, really a lot narrower and just talk about his atonement and substitutionary death, and you can talk about that. But I think a lot of times people don't even include the ascension in part of that good news of Jesus's work.
Right.
It's just a thing that he did, but it's not necessarily good news in any kind of way. So
So maybe one way to start is, if we think of the gospel, there's a lot of different ways to describe the gospel, but part of the gospel is it's the gospel of the kingdom, and Jesus is the king of the kingdom. He is the sacrificial king who is risen from the dead. But when a king accomplishes something, or when he becomes king, typically in the first century, and we actually do have echoes of this even in our own culture, you will ascend, you will steps and often be seated on a throne, which is kind of a symbolic sign that this person is now the king. So even if you watch the ceremony in England of King Charles, there was a walking up to the throne, being seated, being given a scepter and a sword and an orb and all this stuff. And all the Americans are like, what's happening right now? Like, we're not used to this. But these are all symbols of, this is the declaration that this is our king. And so the ascension is similar to that, because yes, Jesus, he proclaimed himself as the Messiah. He is the king, but it's only after he has accomplished his work that he ascends to the heavenly throne and is seated, which is the declaration that he's the king. So this really actually is, in one sense, the culmination of the gospel story, because the resurrection proclaims, yes, the king is now alive, but the king needs to be seated on the throne. He needs to have his coronation day. And so what this is showing, the scriptures are showing, is as he ascends on the clouds of heaven, he's not being seated on an earthly throne, because he's not an earthly king right now in that same sense. He's not here to get rid of Caesar or to get rid of presidents or rulers. He's here to reign over all nations and all lands, which is what Matthew 28 and Acts 1 says. He has all authority on heaven and earth. So how do you symbolize and show that you have all authority in heaven and earth? Well, you're seated in the heavenly throne. And so maybe the example I've given many times, but this might help people in terms of a movie, The Lion King, and I put this in the book, but if you remember the movie The Lion King, which is, the best Disney movie of all time, so you should remember it. But at the end of The Lion King, Simba comes and he defeats Scar. But there's this moment where it shifts over to Rafiki the baboon, if you remember this. And he points at Simba and he says, you must climb. He doesn't say this, but he points at Pride Rock. And then you have this slow motion. He's climbing the rain. I don't know if you remember this. And then he roars.
I got young kids, man. I totally remember this. Yeah.
He roars and all the animals fall down, basically, to symbolize he's the king. Well, actually, that's a good picture of, Jesus Christ defeated the powers of darkness, aka Scar, right? On the cross. You don't have like a death and resurrection scene, but the baboon Rafiki is saying, look, you have to claim the kingship now. You've defeated darkness, but now you must ascend Pride Rock, and all the animals must see you there, and they will bow down and they will worship you and recognize that you are the Lion King. that's what's happening in Jesus' ascension. He is ascending to the right hand of the Father to sit on the throne to reign and rule forever. And so if the gospel is Jesus is king, well, then you have to have the ascension moment. You have to have him claiming that throne. And he does claim that throne. And it's in fulfillment of texts like Daniel chapter 7, where the Son of Man is brought before the Ancient of Days and he's seated on that throne. So in one sense, you could say, the story's not complete after the resurrection, right? Like he has conquered, he has risen from the dead, but he hasn't he hasn't been installed in his kingly rule yet, and that needs to happen. So I don't want to be like, you have to always say the word ascension, but you do have to say, and he's now king, and you must submit yourself to him. Right. And that part of that kingship is him ascending before the throne. So maybe I overemphasize this. I don't know, but it is very central to the gospel, because
that's good.
that is the message that we believe. And 1 Corinthians 15, as I mentioned, Paul doesn't say the words ascension, but by saying Jesus is the Christ, the Messiah, who has died and risen, I think he's assuming in that resurrection, he also then was seated on the throne. So it's implied without explicitly being stated, which, as you share the gospel, what I'm simply trying to get people to understand is you need to imply that, if not explicitly state it. Right. And hopefully it's a part of kind of your mental furniture as you're thinking about the gospel.
Well, I mean, as I'm hearing you talk about it, and even as I've read some of the things you've written on it, it's a part of, when we say Jesus is king, this is part of his coronation ceremony, right?
That's right.
So as we talk about the ascension, we're really talking about, if the resurrection is proof that everything that he said he was going to do, he did. The sacrifice actually was paid. He really did triumph over death. He really is the promised one, right? So he rises from death. That's proof that sacrifice was sufficient. It was received. But in his ascension, we actually get to see the coronation. Oh, he's the king. And if he would have stayed on earth, I think there's a way in which that would have made it like his kingship is really in a local area.
That's right.
But by ascending into the heavens, you're seeing something of his kingship over everything, right?
That's
He's not just the king here; he's actually the king over the heavens and king over the earth.
And this it reminds you of a text like Psalm 2, right? Where it's the nations who are warring against the messianic king, the Jewish king, and Yahweh looks down at them and he laughs because he says, I've installed my king on Mount Zion. Now, in its original context, it's I've installed the Jewish king and you will not take him down. But it ultimately points to Christ, who he's installed him in the heavens. And which earthly king can go up to the heavens and bring him down? No one can. And so his rule is unending. It's you can't challenge it anymore, which is the beautiful truth of the gospel, that we have a king that cannot be dethroned, right? There's no one that can reach him in the heavens, and he will come back one day and install his rule upon the earth, so that throne will come down to the earth.
That's really good. Yeah.
And he will conquer. But in the meantime, he's waiting, he's being patient so that more can hear about his reign and come into that kingdom.
In your book, you organize the ascension around Jesus' office of prophet, priest, king. Can you give a quick overview of that and how you're seeing it kind of relate to those various offices there?
Yeah. So I structured the book that way, partly just to give clarity in terms of like, what does the ascension accomplish? And historically, we've thought of Christ in terms of his threefold office. It's the three anointed offices from the Old Testament, which are prophet, priest, and king. And my argument was, if you look at it from all those angles, there's different aspects of the ascension, or that the ascension kind of gives data on in terms of what Christ continues to do. So part of the argument in the book is that Christ's ascension doesn't mean he just goes and sits on the throne and waits for it all to kind of get over. It's rather he continues to work as the Messiah, right? Being seated in like a cabinet or on a board means you actually have to do a lot of work. And so in the same way, the ascension isn't the cessation of his work. It's actually, it transfers it to a new kind of realm where he's working a different way. He's not working now on the earth bodily in his human form, but now he's working bodily in his human form, but in the heavens. So what does he do as the prophet? The summary that I give, if I can remember correctly, as the prophet, he builds his church, he sends his spirit, he allows the mission to go forward. And so it's the Son, the Father and the Son who send the Spirit to the church to help the church be built. As the priest, what is he continuing to do? And this is where Hebrews is key, is he continues to intercede for his people. Right. So as the high priest would in the Old Testament, they would go before the Father, and he continually goes before the Father. And intercession is just a big word for prayer. He prays for his people. So he prays that they would be protected from the evil one. He prays that we would persevere in the faith, which I've continually found to be actually the most comforting part of the ascension, that Christ continually prays for us. And we can talk more about it, but he's always praying for you. He's always praying for you, and the Father will always listen to the voice of the Son. And then as the King, he continues to rule over all things. And so the kingly aspect is what we usually think of, but I think it's helpful to think of his prophetic task, his priestly task, and his kingly task is to rule.
Man, so the other day we were having family worship, and we were having dinner, and we were talking about this, and my 6-year-old kind of kicked off the whole conversation because she said, so what is Jesus doing right now in heaven?
Yeah.
Like what is he doing with his time, basically?
Yep.
You know?
Yeah.
And so, you know, I actually kind of talked through the prophet, priest, king. Well, he's ruling and reigning, and he's praying for us, and he's sent the Spirit to build the church, and we were talking through some of this stuff. And then my oldest son, who just turned 15 yesterday, he said, what does it mean that Jesus is praying for us? That's kind of like a weird concept to think of Jesus in heaven praying for us. Like, why does he need to still pray in his ascension? Can't he? Does he still need to do that? And what does that even mean? So you brought it up just a minute ago, and we literally were talking about this week. So maybe you can help me answer my 15-year-old's question there.
Yeah, I mean, I would go to texts like Roman. Let me turn here. Hebrews, if I can type it in fast enough. Hebrews 8:4. I guess I can't type. Oh, it's not Hebrews 8:4 that I was looking for. I could just riff on Hebrews, though. You know, Hebrews talks about he's in the heavens and he's continually interceding for us. Yeah. Now, what sort of intercession needs to be made? You know, in John's high priestly prayer, in the Gospel of John, chapter 17, it speaks about how Christ prays for his people that they would continue in the faith, that they wouldn't. That the evil one wouldn't kind of stop their faith from persevering.
Yeah, he tells Peter that, right? He says, Satan wanted to sift you like wheat, but I prayed for you that you wouldn't fail.
Yeah,
right?
There's a great narrative in Luke where Satan is attacking Peter, as you mentioned, and Jesus turns to him and he says, but Peter, I've prayed for you that your faith might not fail. Right. So what do we need to keep doing on earth while Jesus in the heavens? We need to persevere in the faith. We need to continue following him. And what Hebrews presents Jesus as doing is he goes before the Father as our brother, the one who is united to us, who can sympathize with our weaknesses because he became flesh and bone, and our high priest. And the high priest would represent the people of Israel before God. And what the high priest would do is the high priest would represent the nation of Israel before Yahweh in the temple and the tabernacle. In the same way, Jesus Christ goes into what Hebrews calls the heavenly tabernacle, and he represents the requests of the people before the Father. So even as you pray, when you think about it, typically in Christianity, you pray to the Father through the Son and in the Spirit. Right. And so you're praying through the Son, and the Son is presenting those requests and even making his own prayers before the Father. And the question is good. Like, why does he need to pray for us? It's because there's a tendency for us to fall away. Hebrews is all about those who will not heed the warnings to keep persevering in the Christian life. And so our elder brother, our true high priest, is in the heavens before the Father, and he's praying for his people that they might persevere in the faith. And he does that as one who is united to his people. Right. And so Because prayer can be so difficult for Christians, I think this is a huge comfort to us, because while you sleep, Jesus prays for you.
Mm-hmm.
While you go on vacation, Jesus prays for you. While you're in the midst of temptation, Jesus prays for you. And the reality that we see in the scriptures is that he continually intercedes for us. Like he never stops interceding for us. He, as some theologians have said, like he never takes a vacation, like from praying for us. And that is the ultimate means by which we actually do persevere in the faith.
Yeah,
and so
that's so good, man. That is that. Well, you sparked a thought in my head, because we're in the Gospel of John right now. We've been in John for a little over a year. We'll be in it for about another year. And in the Gospel of John, multiple times this happens, but I'm going to be preaching from John 11 this week, where Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead, and there. Martha says to Jesus, I know that whatever you pray for, like it happens. Like the Father listens to you. And Jesus, even when he's praying for the resurrection of Lazarus, it's not like he has to make some big show of this. Like, man, I really hope that I know the Father's answer is either yes, no, or maybe. It's like Jesus knows that what he prays for, because his will is perfectly in line with the Father's, that the Father answers those prayers. And so Jesus says, I already know, this is my summary of Jesus. This is the Message version, but I already know what you're going to do here, Father. But so that they might know, I'm praying, right? And so there's something of that in Jesus' intercessory prayer. If we think of it as Jesus is up there going, okay, Lord, please allow them to persevere. That's a misconception of how Jesus prays. Jesus prays in perfect alignment with the Father's will, and his prayers are always answered.
That's right. Yeah, I found the text that I was thinking of. Hebrews 7:25 says, consequently, he, being Jesus, is able to save to the uttermost, which I think is getting to that perseverance part. He is able to cause his people to continue in the faith, those who draw near to God through him, since the way we persevere in the faith is because he always lives to make intercession for them. The other reference that we have to Christ's intercession, if I'm remembering correctly, is Romans chapter 8, verses 26 and 27. Likewise, the Spirit helps us in our weaknesses, and it's the Spirit himself who intercedes for us. And in this chapter 8, it talks about how, we're going to suffer much persecution. There will be tribulations that we go through. But ultimately, it's the Spirit, it's the Son who intercede for us. And man, what a comfort that is, that Jesus continually prays for us. It's not, sometimes we think, you mentioned this earlier, but we think of what Christ has done before in the past. We think of what he's going to do in the future return, which are glorious things. But to know that he's continually acting on our behalf now is a great comfort to us.
Yeah. So knowing that reality, knowing the reality of the ascension, what Jesus is doing, how should that change the way that we pray, do you think?
Yeah. I think it should give us confidence that all of our prayers are going from us through the Son to the Father. It should give us great confidence to draw near to God, knowing that the Son stands as our mediator. And when the Father looks at us, he sees the Son. And there is intra-Trinitarian eternal love between the Father, Son, and Spirit. And so when he sees us, all he sees is love, because he loves the Son and he loves what the Son has accomplished on our behalf. So I think so often we don't pray because we think we're not worthy to pray. But this should give us great confidence. And then the other thing I'd say is when we don't know what to pray, it's helpful to know that Christ is praying for us.
Yeah, amen.
And I think that frees us to follow the Spirit in terms of what we ought to pray. So sometimes there's times, I'm sure, in people's lives where they're going through such sufferings or tribulations, they literally can't find the words to say, to pray. And often what people have done is they've actually used the prayers of the saints from old, because they're like, I can't find the words to pray. I'm so downcast. I don't know what to say. Going to the Psalms is a great thing to do. But when you can't find the words to pray, it's also just helpful to remember the Spirit himself and the Son intercedes for us. And so even when Romans talks about those kind of groanings that are too deep for words, there's a sense in which there's times in your life where you just are groaning and I think the Son's going to pick these prayers up and he's going to pray for me when I don't know what to say.
The Acts starts with the ascension, right? Before the church is sent out on mission. And I got to imagine, they're, like you said earlier, if you're like, all right, we got the guy that beat death, we got the guy that they can't kill. Sweet. Like we're understanding way more about his divinity and his power and his authority, and how much you're going to be like, okay, I want this guy with us as we go out now on this mission and prepare to spread the gospel and face conflict and resistance and all of that. And yet that wasn't God's plan. He said, actually, I have a better plan than that. And we're going to hit that in John in a few weeks. But I guess for Christians today who can look around at the world and go, man, it feels so chaotic, and it feels like, is the church advancing, and what's happening, and that sort of deal. What confidence, what encouragement should we take from the ascension? Because I could imagine our minds could think similar to the apostles in those early days. If only Jesus was here right now, everything would be okay. Kind of thinking, right?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people rightly think like if people have different opinions about The Chosen, but if you're watching the show The Chosen and you're like, man, I just wish I could have walked and talked with Jesus, been his disciple, gotten to know him, learn from our true rabbi, which are all good desires. And we think about, I really desire to be with Christ, which is the best end state. Like we long to be with Christ. We long to see him face to face. So all those desires are good. But the scriptures say, and Jesus himself says, as you mentioned in John, Jesus himself says in John, it's better that I go away, because if I don't go away, the Spirit, the Helper, the Counselor, the Paraclete won't come to help you.
Right.
And so Jesus affirms, and I think the scriptures as a whole affirms, it's better if he leaves at this point, so that the Spirit might come. So I think of it theologically, of course. I always ask myself, well, then why? Like, why is it better that we have the Spirit than that we have like the bodily person of Jesus here in this time? Because again, in my mind, I have to like agree with the scriptures to agree with that, because I would think it's better to have Jesus here bodily.
For sure.
And I think part of it is that the Spirit is able to indwell every single believer and give them the Spirit of Christ. Well, Jesus is flesh and bone, and he was, and we don't like to use the word limited, but he was limited by his physical being. And so the Spirit is able to come and enliven, regenerate, save people from all over stayed, there would be a sense in which the mission of Jesus is limited. But because now each apostle has the Spirit of Jesus, now this mission can go forth. So really, the tie, I don't quite remember the original question now because I'm off on this, but
it's good.
The tie between Jesus' ascension and our mission as the church is integral, because it's at the ascension of Christ that the Spirit now comes to indwell his followers, to empower them to carry the name of Jesus to the nations. And so when Jesus says, it's better if I leave so the Spirit might come, he is looking forward to the day when we have the very Spirit of Christ living within us. And again, it still takes me time to think, okay, that's better now than if Jesus had stayed in the past that I have. And I think that's probably because we don't give the Spirit enough credit in terms of what the Spirit is doing and how the Spirit is empowering us to do what Christ did and to share what Christ shared. And so I think we have a low view of how the Spirit works in the present time. And we long to be with Jesus Christ. And one day that'll all come to fulfillment where we're with the Father, the Son, and the Spirit in the new heavens and new earth. But in this time, he says, here's the Spirit. This is better for you now. Go forth and share the message of Jesus and be encouraged that the same Spirit that came upon me in my baptism, that empowered me for my ministry, is now empowering you to go out and speak of me. And that's like, we live in that age. We live in the age where we have the Spirit. And Jesus affirms that's a very good thing, and it's actually better that he left. And so I have to continually remind myself of that, though, because it's hard to wrap our minds around.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I so often when you just think of the apostles as human beings, which they are, and you just kind of go like, how in that moment when Jesus is saying, hey, actually, it's going to be better for you guys that I take off. I mean, I wouldn't be able to conceive really in that moment how that could possibly be true. You've walked with him for 3.5 years. You know, you've seen the things he's done. Now he's done this ultimate thing. And so, the question being, the question I originally asked was like, what encouragement should Christians take from the ascension, given sort of the chaos that we we live in. And I think it's exactly what you're saying, which is, well, we have the Holy Spirit, and Christ in his ascension knew that actually that was going to be better for us and said, I'm going to send the Holy Spirit. And him ruling as the king, we have to trust that his plan to see his kingdom be made more visible actually was this plan. This is plan A. This isn't plan B or C or whatever else. So
that's right.
That's what I have to preach to myself on those days where I'm like, man.
Yeah. And I would say even with, everything that's happening politically in our land, especially the last 2 or 3 weeks, a lot of people were rocked to the core in terms of like what's happening in our nation, both in Charlotte, and in Utah, and I don't know when this will come out, but things move so fast. But I think a lot of people are very, they're bothered by what's happening, and they recognize there's dark spiritual forces that are at work, and we can see them wreaking havoc on our land. And there's a lot of division in our country and across the world. And the ascension is one of those. In this midst of chaos, Christ descends, and he there's a song, he reigns above it all. He's in control of all of this. He's sovereign over all of this. He reigns above it all. It doesn't matter who's the president, who's the vice president, in the ultimate sense, because we know that our first and primary loyalty is to him. And so even in the midst of political upheaval, whatever that looks like in whatever land you live in, Christians have this hope that endures and this joy that can't be conquered because Christ reigns and he's returning. And no earthly ruler can take that away from us. So, and I think this is where, obviously it gets controversial to get into politics, but so many people in the United States are putting their hopes in politics, in a political regime or a ruler. And as Christians, we just have to continually remind people, like, there's ebbs and flows of these things, and this is not where your ultimate hope should be placed, because these people will disappoint you. But Christ won't disappoint you. He will be true to all of his promises. And the picture we get in the scriptures is not just that he's the ascended king, but he's the good shepherd. In other words, he's a king that cares for his people, who knows their every need, and who provides for them, who brings them beside streams of flowing water and leads them, feeds them, and provides for them, and even sacrifices himself. And so for his own people. And so it's just a reminder of the truth of the gospel, in the midst of chaos, in the midst of uncertainty. It's this anchor for us, an anchor for our soul. And I think Christians need to be those who, in the midst of maybe a dark time in society where people are questioning things, that's where we bring the light and the hope of the gospel.
Yeah, our king can't be assassinated. Our king can't be overthrown. Our king rules above in the heavens, as you said. Man, one of the concepts you wrote about in your book that I thought was really good that I want to hit before we end today is you talked about witness, work, and worship. And you said that that's our response to the ascension. It's to witness, work, and worship. And can you just unpack that a little bit for us? I found that really helpful.
Yeah, I don't remember what I meant by work, so you're going to have to help me with that. I think the witness and worship
sorry, not
one.
Work. So, wait, I have a typo in my notes. So you're
like,
I don't know what you mean by work. What did
I say?
Hey, that could fit in there though. I could, a little the next edition.
No, that's good. So witness, as we already alluded to, the ascension occurs at the point where Jesus, just previously to the ascension in Acts chapter 1, he sends them out on their mission. And really what they're witnessing to is that Christ is king. And so the ascension reminds us we have one job left here on this earth. You have those memes. You had one job. Yeah. Christians have one job. That one job is to witness to this king who is reigning over all. And so the ascension just reminds us, like, we are to point people ultimately to him. We can get very confused on, like, what are Christians to do? How are we to interact politically? All these complicated questions. Who are we to be as a church? Our job is to tell others about Jesus Christ and what he's done. And I think the ascension just reminds us of the centrality of that. Wait for his return. So, when Jesus ascends, into the heavens, the angels come and tell the disciples, just as you saw him leave, so he will return in the same way. He will establish his kingdom, his very good kingdom, with no sin, no sickness, no death, no tears upon this earth. And we are those who wait for that kingdom. We're not hoping in any earthly kingdom to bring that. Rather, we're waiting for the King of Kings to bring that. And what was the final word I used? I
Worship.
can't remember.
I mean, worship. You can go with work if you want to unpack that, but worship is probably better. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, let's go back to the Lion King, right? What happens when a king ascends to the throne? You recognize their sovereignty and you bow down before them. And that's what you see. You see in Revelation as the Lamb is seated upon the throne. It's all creatures, all of creation, all human beings worship before him because he's been installed as the king over all. And so, our ultimate aim, yes, is to witness to him, but it's so that all creation and all human beings might worship him for who he is, because he's worthy of worship, because of what he's accomplished and who he is in his person. And so the ascension just brings us back to kind of the core beliefs of all Christians in terms of what Christ has done and who he is.
Yeah. I like to ask people this type of a question, and we've hit on lots of different aspects of the ascension. And so thank you so much for hitting all that for us. But what do you think is like, you don't have to distill this down to a sentence or something, but related to the ascension, what's like a final thought that you want to make sure that Christians really understand related to the ascension, that they, that you think that they would really be blessed by if they would think more deeply about the ascension? I know, again, we've hit lots of these different pieces, but is there any way in which you would kind of want to distill that down for us?
Yeah, I mean, maybe, some of what I put in my book is, and what we've been talking about is that, the ascension doesn't end Christ's work. It continues Christ's work. And just to remember that Christ is still active. And that's hard for us because we can't see him.
Yes.
But he's still active and he's still working. And that reminds us and it draws us into the full work of Christ. So sometimes I think we limit what Christ does and what he's done in the past, what he's doing in the future, and what he's doing now. But it brings kind of a centrality of Christ's work back to the forefront. And so while I think it's true and right to talk about, we live in the age of the Spirit where the Spirit indwells us, that doesn't mean Christ is absent. It means he's present in a different way. He's present through the Spirit, right? And so we don't live in the age where we just focus on the Spirit and we forget about what Christ has done. No, Christ is still acting, and it's in and through the Spirit.
Yeah.
And so I think that brings the ascension, actually, it can cause people to almost think, okay, we've moved on from Christ and now we're focusing on the Spirit. In a way, that's not true. It actually brings us back to the centrality of Christ in all things, even in the present. And maybe this isn't quite what you were asking, but the other thing I'd encourage people to do is, as you're reading through the Old Testament, is to look for ascension stories. So often we read through the scriptures and we just kind of wait for, okay, Jesus ascends in the New Testament at the end of his ministry. But if you look at the stories of the Old Testament, you see Moses ascending Mount Sinai. You see Elijah going up in the whirlwind of heaven. You see David ascending Mount Zion. You see all of these stories of the Son of Man ascending on the cloud of heavens, or Joseph ascending to this kind of high place in Egypt, or Daniel becoming second in command in Babylon. So you see all of these stories that are, I think, foreshadowing that there's going to be another figure that comes that ascends to this high court or this kingly throne. And you're actually being prepared as you read through the scriptures for that to be fulfilled in Jesus Christ. And so sometimes it takes someone pointing out like this theme, and then as you shine the flashlight on the scriptures, you start to see it everywhere because it kind of is everywhere.
Right,
and so I would argue once you have your eyes open to this theme, you're actually going to start seeing it everywhere.
It's pretty fun to think about what all Jesus might have been teaching on that Bible study in on the Emmaus Road, right? And
that's right. Yeah.
Maybe the ascension was one of those themes that he was walking them through and showing them. But Well, church, I hope that you've seen today that the ascension is not just a footnote in the story of Jesus, that it is the event that crowns his earthly ministry, that it is the event that launches the mission of the church, and that it is the event that assures us that Christ reigns right now as our prophet, priest, and king. So if you want to dig deeper into this, I can't recommend Patrick's book enough. It's short. It's accessible. Some of these books can get a little overwhelming. They're just super dense, but this book is very accessible. I think it's great, but it's packed with insight. It's called The Ascension of Christ, Recovering a Neglected Doctrine, published by Lexham Press. So, Patrick, thanks again, man, so much for joining us for Church Matters.
Good to be with you guys. Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you, brother.